Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 15 November 2020. IoT, Krebs gets fired, DNS, Joff Thyer, Clearview, Cicada, and FunnyDream, as well as all the show wrap-ups.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense in Depth requires discovery in depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery in-depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID. Increased attacks, skill gaps, talent shortages, expanding attack surfaces. Cybersecurity and IT teams face these real issues every day. CyberA for Teams is the #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. CyberA for Teams makes managing teams easier, guarantees measurable training outcomes, and keeps your team's skills sharp to meet today's biggest security threats. And did you know 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberA? CyberA for Teams. Now you know. Visit cybera.it/solved to solve your team training challenges.
All right, I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University. I'm your host, and welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show. It's episode 84. It's like, wow, that's a lot of episodes. Let's wrap up all the show topics for the week. On Application Security Weekly number 130, Mike, Matt, and John had Rickard Carlson, the co-founder and CEO at Detectify. And Rickard was talking about automation and hacking. And I actually kept alluding to this on Security Weekly last night, but I never quite got it across. But Joff's always saying how, you need pen testing and as you might, and Tyler as well. But this is sort of what this segment was about, how automation can help you, but it can't really replace that sort of human ingenuity when it comes to, like really testing something. I mean I really agree with that so much, because you can certainly let the automation ensure that the process is fast and that it's relevant, which was kind of what that segment was about. But it's never going to replace that ability to just think around the corner, think outside the box. Just go. But I could just break the window with my fist. Kind of stuff that humans do that automation often doesn't. So don't get sidetracked by the marketing materials on that. On Business Security Weekly number 196, Paul and Matt had on Kevin O'Brien, the CEO and co-founder of Great Horn, and they were talking about email security, obviously. And I thought it was a pretty interesting segment, because they were talking about how email is just one of these massive components of risk, but it's only now becoming one of the big chunks of your risk mitigation strategy. And even though it's the largest attack vector, I mean that's where most attacks come from. So that's a pretty interesting segment. And in the second segment, the CISO dilemma. This is all just their articles, but I always like to read you the articles so you can go listen to that segment. The CISO dilemma: balancing security, productivity with a housebound workforce. Obviously, very germane. The 7 cybersecurity predictors for 2021. How the pandemic created a more trainable workforce. I don't know about that. I'm pretty untrainable, but Gartner's IT spending to focus on fast time to value. Gartner's compatibility will make business more resilient and agile, and avoiding cloud sprawl. So a whole bunch of cool articles in that second segment. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 207, Adrian, Matt, and Paul did the news, and then they had Steve Porcello, a senior security engineer from Gigamon, on to talk about how ransomware has shifted tactics, and we certainly talked about that a lot, but it's shifted to a more prolonged and targeted approach. And I think we've all seen that, and just from reporting news stories on it and looking at ransomware in the lab and all this kind of thing, I just see a constant shift away from that sort of just, opportunistic thing that was going on a few years ago to this, just like, this is our target. We're going to develop a framework. We're going to focus that framework on this target, and we're going to put that into play. Very sophisticated stuff going on there. On Security Weekly News number 83, Jason returned to talk about how one of our old famous gaming systems, which is still there, Capcom, refused to pay a ransom when they got ransomware. They were just kind of like, nope, not doing it. And then the attackers actually threatened them data disclosure on Capcom, and Capcom was like, yeah, okay, fine, just put it out there, no worries. And so an interesting turn there. Go listen to Jason talk about that. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 52, Jeff, Josh, and Scott had Adrian Sanabria on to talk about his new role at Security Weekly. He was hired by CRA and what is being planned for us over the next 12 to 18 months. So you might want to check that one out, especially everybody here is going to check that one out for sure. Adrian is a senior research engineer at Cyber Risk Alliance, and he stuck around for the second segment, and they did talk about how CRA, Cyber Risk Alliance, and the acquisition will impact the Security and Compliance Weekly audience. So, okay. I haven't had a chance to watch that one yet. I'm going to go watch that one later because Adrian's great. So if you haven't gotten a chance to listen to Adrian, go check that one out. He's really cool. And we have some friends in common from a long time ago. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 675, Epic, last night. Show started with Jamie Fernandez, the Senior Director of Product Management, and Karsten Shiras, the Product Manager at Mimecast. I was like, we're going to talk about Mimecast, but it was an awesome segment. We had so much fun talking to these guys about current attacks, ransomware threats, how threats are developing. And we just had a really fun time. They were real fun people to talk to and super smart. So I enjoyed that segment a lot. And I think when everybody's having a good time, it really comes through on the segment. And when you have really smart people on to talk to, it's really rewarding. And I swear, on the Tonight Show, probably the next guest on the Tonight Show would have gotten bumped. Because we were having so much fun with that first segment. But that would have been too bad because the second segment was also a lot of fun. Michael Reutman, the chief data scientist at Kenna, came on the show, and he was talking a lot about data science. He answered lots of questions for Jeff, and Jeff wouldn't let me ask a question. Thanks, Jeff. But it was just a great segment. I mean, and it could have just gone in so many directions because whether it was me and Joff pushing for talking more about math and stat, Jeff wanting to talk more about the sort of policy, compliance kind of side of all that stuff. But Michael's a really smart guy who was talking about prediction and vulnerability and had a lot of interesting insights about the industry and malware in general. But they also had a long talk about vulnerability, like what is a vulnerability, and Jeff had to whip out some ancient tome he had on the shelf there that actually had a definition from, I don't know, a long time ago. But it was one of those segments where you, again, kind of wish that, and I know everyone wanted to ask a lot more questions, but we ran out of time. And I think it was really one of those segments that could have gone a lot longer. And you may also want to spend some time asking yourself, does Michael Reutman look like Plague? The whole time I was thinking Christian Slater. I was like, it was Christian Slater all the way. And then Paul said he looks like Plague, and I was like, oh. And Michael said, I'm going for that. And so everybody else thought Plague, and I saw it. I mean, once they said that, I was like, oh yeah, it could be Plague. But anyway, and of course then a news segment, later on. My favorite thread of the week is going to be inspired by Joff last night. There was a story about DNS. Particularly Verizon DNS. So Verizon put out this article, and I put the link to it on the site. But they were talking about some new approaches to DNS that are supposedly going to make it better. So I was initially thinking about some things about DNS, and DNS is one of those things that we all kind of take for granted. I mean, it's there; everybody's using it every hour of every day. Your phone is using it, and the APIs are using it, and so on and so forth. And a lot of times, in sort of the old school security situations, people took advantage of the fact that port 53 is often open in TCP and UDP. So many companies, just flip that port open because that's, DNS. And it's like you expect it to be running there. And so people come in through that port. And they didn't really think about it for a long, long time. And now that they're open and the people quit monitoring that port and they quit monitoring traffic, it creates a kind of security blind spot. And that's not really the threat. I understand. I mean that's not what this article is about, and that's not what I really want to talk about here. But I mean, really, there was sort of the point is that DNS is old was the point of the article, and that it's critical to the proper operation of everything. And so, there was a lot of discussion about that. And then so they were talking about this story last night, and basically, Joff went on a pretty good rant, so you should definitely go check that out. But he's right. I mean, basically what came out of this was that, is this really this public service thing that Verizon is trying to do? Or is it something a little more nefarious than this? It was like, and when he said that, it was like my whole world sort of got shattered at that point, because I was going, wait, what? Wait, no. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, he's right. I mean, DNSSEC does the same thing they're talking about. So the encryption and so forth, and trying to authenticate users that are coming in from DNS. And theirs is called authenticated resolution, which, supposedly reduces the DNS attack surface. And, and I was going, okay, that sounds, it is sort of like DNSSEC, so it's really the same thing. It's just, DNS over HTTPS, DNS with TLS and all this kind of stuff. And, Joff just sort of got really worked up about it really fast. And I really felt like, I actually see it now. And I'm usually really cynical, but I was being all, like happy, optimistic, Pollyanna kind of thing about this, and my whole worldview just went right out the window. And I just suddenly realized that Google and Verizon and everyone else, they don't really care about DNS security. I mean, I guess they kind of care, but not that much. It was just a way to try to lock me into using that stream by saying, oh, it's more secure, so use this DNS instead of that DNS. Because why? Because then all my DNS goes through them, and they can mine it. And, so in the end of this, it may not be that a 40-plus year technology is actually a problem. It kind of is, but rather it's the ability that they're collecting your information and selling it without your permission. That, to me, is a problem. DNSSEC already exists, but anyway, I put that whole article up, and so let's talk about the rest of the news. All right. Joff Thyer did announce, and I was going to re-announce it for him on the show last night, that he was doing an awesome course that he has developed called Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development with Joff Thyer, which I think will be a really awesome course that he's running online in January. I put the link to the course. You can register. It was super cheap. I literally go look at it, and you're gonna expect a much higher. I'm not even trying to say I don't get a cut, Joff. Maybe you should give me a cut, but anyway, what would you be doing in January anyway? I mean, normally you go skiing, but it's like, I don't know about, skiing this year, like, maybe not. So check out Joff's course. The IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act was passed by the United States Senate this week. It has not yet been signed by the president into law, but it has been sent to the president's desk by Congress. One of the components of this is that NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, must issue standards-based guidelines for the minimum security of IoT devices that are owned by the federal government. So that means NIST is going to have to sit down and write a standard that's going to be put into place for devices that are currently owned and or being purchased by the U.S. government. The OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, who lost all my top secret data a few years ago, thanks guys, but will also be required to implement requirements for civilian agencies to have information security policies in place that are compliant with the NIST guidelines. So this is a very, very aggressive approach to say NIST will set standards. OMB is going to require civilian agencies that either purchase and or sell things to the federal government to have these guidelines, to have a policy that brings them into compliance. In addition, federal agencies will be required to implement a vulnerability disclosure policy for IoT, and they cannot purchase non-compliant devices for their use. Now, we talked about this a little bit on the show last night, and and people say, well, there's always ways around all this stuff, but hey, it's a start. All this is in response to the increasing threat from IoT worldwide, and a lot of other countries are pressing for controls and restrictions on these devices, and they really do create a massive threat surface. There was another story on the show last night about Tickle TVs, and how Tickle TVs had open ports on the televisions that you put in your home or in your business. And these are sort of the low end kind of where you buy a whole bunch of them to put up, I want a TV in every room or whatever. And they had open ports. They had, devices that are phoning home to China. They're phoning home here and there. And, these things are a giant threat. So it's good to see that there's some movement in that way. So hopefully the president will sign this into law. I know there's problems with it, but there's always problems. We have to keep moving forward. The LAPD has now banned the use of Clearview AI due to some problems that they're reporting. One report from the LAPD showed more than 25 employees had performed 475 searches, and I wasn't exactly sure if it meant that each employee had performed more than 400. That was what my impression was, that 25 people had performed more than 475 searches using the platform just during the trial period. And as such, the deputy chief announced that department personnel, and this is what he said, shall not use third-party commercial facial recognition services nor conduct facial recognition searches on behalf of outside agencies. So there's a lot of controversy around facial rec stuff. And Clearview AI is a company that had said they would only sell their services to law enforcement, and because they didn't want individuals using this for stalking and other stuff. So it sounds like maybe it's not being used exactly the way that anybody wanted, and now LAPD has blocked it. LAPD also expressed concern that Clearview grabs photos from all over the place, and that may raise public trust concerns with the LAPD. The ACLU, in this alphabet soup segment, the ACLU has sued Clearview in the past, and they for using photos that were in violation of basic privacy rights. So they were grabbing photos from all over the place, and they were grabbing camera frames from all over the place. Clearview did claim in January that they're only going to allow law enforcement to use their products. A bill called the National Biometric Information Privacy Act was introduced in the Senate this year, which would provide some basic biometric privacy to U.S. citizens, but that bill has not yet been passed by the Senate or even taken up as far as I know. Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM have all pledged that they would not sell their facial recognition technology to police departments until there is a national law in place to protect biometric rights. Clearview claimed that every search, and so this was their defense of them, they claimed that every search done must have a case number and a crime type to ensure that it's responsibly used. So apparently the backstory is that I was reading into this article was that LAPD was seeing abuse of this. And I don't know what the people were doing with these searches, but so they've suspended it. And, I don't know. That kind of stuff scares a lot of people, and it seems pretty scary in general. The hacking group Cicada, which is also called Stone Panda, and I want to get a cool name assigned to like Security Weekly, but it would probably end up being called like Drooling Rabid Raccoon or something. But Cicada, Stone Panda, is suspected of being behind the massive zero logon attacks that have been going on in the auto industry and other sectors since last year. The latest wave of attacks started in October 2019 and is still continuing. This group just recently, though, added the zero logon problem to what they already had a pretty big toolkit that they were using. The primary focus of the group is listed as espionage, which had all kinds of corporate, and they're really trying to extract corporate documents. And I guess it started with the auto industries and now seems to be evolving and expanding into other industries as well. But this particular Cicada is believed being an APT that is sponsored by the Chinese government. Another state-sponsored Chinese APT, which is called FunnyDream, this was a report from Bitdefender, basically said FunnyDream is now out there, and this is a kind of a new APT. The attacks of this group primarily had so far focused on Southeast Asian governments. But much like Stone Panda, they seem to be focused primarily on espionage, and they have a pattern which uses 3 malware payloads: Chinoxy, PC Share, and FunnyDream. So Chinoxy, if you haven't seen it, is a backdoor Trojan that is very small and simple, and they get this probably deployed by phishing attacks, and then that is used to allow the installation of PC Share, which is a well-known Chinese rat. So that one has been out there for a while and allows for further exfiltration as well as the installation of additional tools. And once they get the PC Share installed, they come back and install FunnyDream. And FunnyDream is basically a toolkit for data extraction. So it has all sorts of tools in there to find, search, extract, and so forth. Really, really, elaborate, fully developed, mature type of product that is now being used to exploit these systems in Southeast Asia. I will reiterate that U.S. President Donald Trump did fire Chris Krebs, the head of CISA, due to Mr. Krebs stating that the election was the most secure in history, a statement I think most of us completely agree with. They spent more effort and time on securing this election than anything in the past. The truth apparently rankled people who are trying to claim that there's election fraud going on. So Krebs took over the office in 2018, and I personally think he's done a great job at turning CISA into something that is a useful resource, and it's really a shame to see petty and petulant gaslighting stuff going on and firing somebody who just did their job. So despite all the misinformation, there still does not appear to be any actual evidence of hacking of the 2020 election, and Krebs may have been focused on and Krebs had focused on APT groups that did those 2016 election hacks in Russia, and even went to as far as issuing indictments, which we think were related to that. They're not clear exactly, but I was very disappointed in this firing, and I think it was a mistake. Americold got taken out by ransomware that started on November 16th. Americold is a massive organization that you've probably never heard of, but they are this cold storage link in the U.S. food supply chain. They are also now a major component of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution linkage. They filed a report with the SEC confirming the attack. Basically reported from Bleeping Computers went on and said that their phones, their email, their inventory management, and their order fulfillment systems were all down. So this is certainly nothing new, and it's not really that dramatic, but a ransomware attack. But it definitely shows that attackers pretty much have no scruples when it comes to this type of attack. And look for more attacks on the vaccine distribution chains. I mean, I think they're going to go there next. So, folks, if you're involved in that, start, girding your loins, as they say. As we head into the end of this lovely year, tax season will again occur. Unfortunately, that's one thing that never stops. And a new ransomware called Mount Locker is targeting TurboTax. TurboTax is a widely used tax software by many, many people, both commercially and individually. Mount Locker has been around since back in July. They first found it. And it uses this modern ransomware approach of exfiltrating or decrypting your files and then threatening to release them, as well as encrypting all the local files. But this targeted attack and this new version was found that specifically targets .tax, .tax 2019, etc. type files, which are the old tax returns stored on your drive by TurboTax. So back those old returns up in a safe place and keep them out of ban, lest you get this kind of thing dumped on you. And finally, in the U.S., this next week normally kicks off the holiday season of final exams, travel, all that. But the CDC, in what has become lately a rare event, made a statement asking people not to travel for Thanksgiving holiday. In the U.S., the Wednesday before Thanksgiving has traditionally been one of the most awful. I used to have to fly every time on that because I used to go to this conference and it ended on that Wednesday, and we always had to fly on Wednesday evening of the day before Thanksgiving, which is literally the worst day of the entire year to try and travel. People trying to fly home, or sometimes we had to go do audits or whatever. But this year, the CDC is advising to skip it, and many states are advising not to take the sleigh ride to grandma's house and just stay home with your own family group. So check out what your local rules are, and maybe let's just get this year over with, starting in 2021 with Joff's course, and maybe it'll lead to a better year. We're off next week for the holiday, so I will see you again in December. Thanks for watching, and that's a news wrap-up for the 15 November 2020 in the time of plague. Happy Thanksgiving.